borderline illegally anti-union. Like, you're not supposed to interfere with the creation of a union, but corporations still do. That's why when Amazon was trying, well, when I say Amazon, the Amazon workers were trying to make a union, and Amazon was like being really aggressive about convincing them not to. It was newsworthy because you're not supposed to do that. There are striking garment workers, International Labor Agency. This again is why, especially here in the South, where wages are lower than other parts of the country, they're really aggressive about not letting unions in, because unions typically require higher wages, and that's how the companies around here make more money, is by paying people less. Collective action, everyone working together is stronger than working alone. And then just some of the companies, General Electric, obviously. Did I get, oh no, I didn't do anything for McCormick. Oh well. I got a bunch of pictures of these Pullman Palace cars for a couple of reasons. One, we're going to end on the Pullman Palace car strike. But also just to show how, like, incredibly ornate they were on the inside. These are train cars. I mean, it's like really fancy armchairs and like carpeting and weird like silk on the walls and stuff. Crystal decanters and glasses, and everything's just overly fancy. This one reminds me of like an old lady's front room. You got like tassels and shit hanging off the chair there. And then there's another one. I mean, that's just a damn couch. Be good for sleeping, a long journey, just like lean over and fall asleep. Having taken a long train journey, I can appreciate some of these. And there's, steel mill. And the crowds of immigrants coming off the boats. Ah, yes. So here is a GIF I managed to get to properly go on the PowerPoint of top country of birth among U.S. inhabitants by state. Lots of Germany up until like the late 1900s. Like really late. It was 1980, 1990 before like it was largely Mexico. A lot of Ireland, obviously, but I have a slide, I think it's next chapter, that shows like the total number of immigrants over from like the 1800s until like 2000, and the number of German immigrants is more than like all the other immigrants combined. We are a German country, basically. But yeah, it's quite interesting. A lot of Germans, especially in the Midwest. Again, heading westward to Wisconsin, both when I drove and when I took the train. Lot of I keep forgetting the name of the people with the weird hats. I don't know. They spoke a lot of German. I was on a train, like a long night train, and there was just like a whole family behind me just like joking in German. It's like, okay, this is interesting. The Amish, that's it. I keep wanting to say Mormons. That's not right at all. The Amish. Lots of Amish from like Pennsylvania westward is just Amish. All right. So, once again, industrialization of work, especially within the factories themselves. The unskilled workers, especially the immigrants who also were dealing with a language barrier and a cultural barrier, we're dealing with unfamiliar, unpleasant, and often dangerous industrial work. No kind of governmental benefits, so if you got yourself hurt, you were out of luck. It's like, oh, my arm got caught in the machine and now I don't have an arm. Well, I guess you're not working here anymore, bye. Or if the company just decided, oh, we're going to downsize and we're going to get rid of a bunch of workers and we're just going to get rid of the immigrants because we're racist. Well, sucks for you. Bye. Skilled workers were usually a little bit better off. We're often fighting the trend of mechanization because they were the ones that had their own tools and were used to working at their own pace. But as work became more collectivized, became more moving at the pace of the machines, they too had to move to the timetable and manufacture to a certain standard. The book mentions a mechanist in Lowell, Massachusetts, quitting after he was told he had to arrive at the opening bell. The doors were locked and he could not leave until quitting time. And he called this, quote, a system of slavery because, having never had any kind of difficulty in his life, suddenly you have to be here at a certain time, you can't leave to a certain time is slavery. Guild workers were used to just like coming and going as they please and drinking heavily on the job. So actually having to be at work at a certain time and not leaving until a certain time was shocking for them. So as a whole, workers saw improvement in their economic situation to a degree. You did make more money working in the factory than you did working on a farm, if only because factory work was more stable income. As we've mentioned, the farm income was based on what the market was doing at the time. If the market decided, hey, wheat is really expensive right now, well, surely you want to grow lots of wheat, but so does every other farmer in the damn country. So you're going to flood the market, and then wheat prices are going to drop, and you're going to lose your farm. So the safest thing to do is to grow a lot of different stuff, but then you're not making much money overall. It's safer, but you're just barely getting by. And if, say, one of the crops that you're growing just bottoms out, then you're actually losing money on that crop. But if you work in a factory, you're getting paid by the hour. So, was it hourly pay back then? It might have still been like pay by the amount of crap you got done, but it was still more stable than farm work. Still, though, it certainly wasn't equal pay for equal work. If you were a skilled laborer, you were paid more than unskilled laborers. White workers were paid more than black workers, and men were paid more than women because, 1800s. Oh, and by the way, child labor. Child labor was obviously a thing. They'd sometimes work 12 hours a day for less than $1 a day. The days of a father working to take care of the whole family were well and truly over. And I know this, if you know anything about history, or know at least about the pop culture of history, usually you think like, oh, but wasn't like the 1950s, this idea of the father goes off to work and everybody else, like the mother stays at home and takes care of the family and the children go to school and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that was propaganda. The idea of only the father had to work and took care of the whole family, that's not been a thing for over 100 years now. So we have folks working a production line. Again, Henry Ford did not invent the assembly line. He did not invent the car. He just put the two together. Here's a horrifying machine. Anybody know what this is? What's that? Not wood. No, that's steel. It's a pneumatic hammer used to beat steel into proper shapes. This thing here is driven by this big air pump, and it raises up and then slams down at a certain rhythm. And these dudes here move a piece of steel between the hammer coming down to beat it into the proper shape. And needless to say, the massive pneumatic hammer doesn't care whether it's steel in the way or, a person. And the way you shut it off is this dude here turns this crank around and cuts the air supply to the pneumatic hammer, but that's not like a modern day quick stop device that locks a machine in place. It simply cuts off the air supply and it slowly turns off. So yeah, extremely dangerous. That's a pneumatic hammer. Then you had this lovely thing. This was a stamp press. As you can see here, they're stamping out helmets. And you've got that guy with his hand right there at it. Look how big that thing is. I don't like that at all. But yeah, they would take, pointing at the screen, they would take like sheets of metal and just put them in this thing, and it would mash them into helmets. These are the skilled workers. I believe these are glass blowers. This was the ideal for them, where you work at your own pace and you just sort of hang around and, do things as you please. But as things became more industrialized, they were forced to work at the pace of the machines. And also child labor, because obviously. He's shelling oysters, looks like. Which, if you know anything about shelling oysters, the oyster shell is extremely sharp, and the knife you have to use to shell the oyster is extremely sharp. And that kid looks to be about 8 or 9, maybe. So, I'll just grab it. Thank you. Oh, and also, this is not great. This is often where they sent kids, into the coal mines, because there were often shafts in the mines that were too small for the adult men to get into, so they just stuck the kids in there. A lot of times there'd be like carts that could barely fit into the mine shaft, but the men couldn't fit in there behind them, so they just send the kids in to push the carts up through the shaft. Yeah, Sure, that was fantastic for the lungs. So, in response to all of that, to try to get better working conditions and better wages, because even though, as we said, the factories were a little better than the farms, not by a great deal. Oh, hey, my stream is up. Cool. Hopefully it's been up long enough to actually do something. Right. Yeah, so to get better wages and better working conditions, workers formed unions, but obviously the employers did their best to resist the forming of unions, as they do to this day. Many employers insisted that they and their workers shared identical interests, that they set wages and conditions. They set wages and conditions for the workers' best interests. You know, as you saw earlier, that were for the best interest of the workers. And while the big businesses were more than happy to organize to get rid of competition or lobby for assistance from the government, they saw unions as being not only unlawful but also immoral. They wouldn't negotiate with labor unions, which is known as collective bargaining. This is one of many collective actions that labor unions could take. And again, simply considered them illegitimate, which, yeah, that's the whole thing. Apparently there was, when I worked security at GE, there was going to be some kind of labor union, not even a demonstration, but like they were just going to show up outside GE and just advertise the union. And it was like, you'd have thought that we were going to be under siege. Like, don't talk to the union people. And if someone goes over to talk to the union people, make sure you write down who it was and how long they talked to them. And it's like, you guys are terrified of unions. Chill out. So, on to specific unions. We have the Noble Order of the Knights of Labor, founded by Uriah Stevens, 1869. This was not the first labor union, but it was one of the first very successful unions. So Terence Powderly became the Grand Master in 1879, and they pushed for a lot of very important rights for workers that we take for granted today. 8-hour workday, abolition of child labor, equal pay for women, and, which is unusual for, I was going to say a labor union, but any group in this time period, they accepted African Americans, immigrants, except the Chinese, because this is still 1879, and women as members, which was very progressive for the time. I mean, again, Chinese weren't allowed as citizens until like the 1940s. So membership soared until the Haymarket Square rally. This was, was it organized by anarchists? Let's see. Local assemblies for the Knights joined a nationwide strike to press for an 8-hour workday. Nice. Yes. For months before the general strike, McCormick Harvester plant in Chicago had been the center of a violent conflict over wages and work conditions. Police killed 2 strikers in a clash between union members and strikebreakers who tried to cross the picket lines. In response, a group of anarchists led by the German-born activist August Spies called for a rally at Haymarket Square to protest police violence. Long story short, it resulted in more police violence, and a lot of people got killed. Mostly policemen, because they shot into the crowd, but it was like a crossfire, and policemen on the other side of the crowd got hit because the policemen outnumber the crowd, and they just got real trigger happy because America. And they, most of the fatalities and injuries resulted not from the bomb, but from the police crossfire after the explosion. Subsequent trial convicted 8 anarchists of murder. There was no evidence that any of them had planted a bomb or used weapons. 4, including August Spies, were executed. And although this was organized by anarchists who were not connected with the union, the event that precipitated the rally was technically connected to the union, so it sullied the reputation, and the membership of the union itself dropped. So the Haymarket Square rally damaged the Knights of Labor. Because, opponents of unions are more than happy to paint unions with the same brush as they do anarchists. So here's their crest. That is the most perfect government in which injury to one is the concern of all.
From Snapchat, Weston Hill, I sent you a snap.
All right. Maybe don't do that. That sounded like a PA announcement. That was so loud. I thought we were getting called from the front office. So here's the meeting for the Haymarket Square, both in English and in German, because again, most of the anarchists were German. And here's a rather propagandistic image of the event, where we've got someone shooting at the police when there's no proof that anyone fired at the police. There was an explosion which scared everybody, and then the police started shooting. So, more stuff with unions. Powderly and the Knights of Labor officially disavowed using strikes, even though it was a nationwide strike that got us the 8-hour workday. The American Federation of Labor, or AFL, was more than happy to use strikes, because that's like the strongest weapon in a union's arsenal. However, they were more discerning in who they let into their ranks. They only employed the highest paid and skilled craftsmen, left out women, African Americans, and immigrants, because classism and racism, I guess. So they were only focused on getting better wages and hours to share in the wealth of industrial capitalism, and they had more than 1 million members by 1900, so they were growing quite well. But still, only 1 in 15 workers actually belonged to any one union, due to the corporations working with the federal government and keeping unions down. I mean, like I said, even to this day, Like, unions are spoken about in hushed whispers. Like, again, at GE, I largely worked third shift, night shift, where nobody was usually around. And we had, one of the things the guys did on break was play with the, what are those called? The cornhole boards. And the guy that brought them in was a volunteer firefighter. So the cornhole board was painted with the crest of the firefighting unit he worked with. Well, come to find out, the crest of that firefighting unit was the crest of a firefighting union, because, sure, I guess, but that was offensive enough that GE told him he had to either paint over it or not bring it anymore, because GE was so terrified of a firefighters union that the guy volunteered with. So yeah, it's real weird sometimes. So yeah, the unions terrify some companies. And again, not just the federal government and corporations working against them, but again, the diversity of the workers made it difficult for them to work together. As we mentioned, the various divides, racial, cultural, ethnic, gender, etc., made it difficult for them to work together. Here's the AFL crest. All goods bearing this label are guaranteed union made, AFL. And this is a common anti-union thing they'd put up. The strike has failed, go back to work. And then they're, again, in multiple languages. The first one looks like Russian. I'm not sure what the other ones are. And the first one's, at least in Cyrillic, I don't know if it's necessarily Russian, because there are other languages that use that type of writing. And then you've got, like, you know, the unskilled laborer wants $1 a day. The skilled laborer wants $3 a day. The, looks like a banker here wants a salary of $5,000. Then you've got further up, I want $1 million, worth $50 million, I want the earth. You know, further up as you go. So let's get down to what I've been alluding to since like last chapter. And that's the violence between the unions, or well, the workers and the owners. So it wasn't always unions. So it was difficult to deal with the companies, because again, they were massive corporations, and their alliance with the federal government, which again was the whole damn government. But unions did still have their one major weapon, which was the strike. And as I explained to my class yesterday, a strike is, to put it simply, you know, if you decide, oh, well, this job sucks, I'm going to stay home and show my boss that I don't like working here, well, your boss is just going to have someone else come in, and you're going to lose out on that day's pay. But if you and everybody else at your job didn't go to work, then your boss is going to feel it. If you worked at a factory and, say, 300 other people decided to also all take the day off or take the week off or just not come back into work until you got a pay raise or the conditions improve, that's a major, well, it's a major tool. It's a major strength that unions have. But it takes a level of organization. You can't just go around and say, hey, let's all take the next week off until our boss does something. You have to have some level of construction behind that. And the most terrifying type of strike is a general strike, which is every business in the entire, usually city, goes on strike. And that shuts down the whole city. Train stations shut down, businesses shut down, gas stations shut down. That's what actually precipitated the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. So even just like the threat of a general strike is usually enough to get people to do something. We're going to have a rail union strike, but the federal government stepped in on that. So we're going to talk about two major strikes before we end class today, and then we're going to show a video. You online folks, I'm going to post the link because I don't want my video to get taken down. So one of the most famous strikes was the 1892 Homestead strike. This was Carnegie's Homestead, Pennsylvania steel factory, obviously. If it's Carnegie, it's steel. He was a pretty decent boss. He paid his workers fairly well. Obviously, though, if you were a skilled worker, you made more than the unskilled worker. And one such skilled worker was John McLuckie, who was the head of the, let me read this properly, Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers. So he was in charge of a union. Carnegie actually worked pretty well with them. They were, I wouldn't say friends, but they were friendly. They were on good terms. And then 1892 happened, and there was an economic downturn, which we're going to see in greater detail later on. So steel prices dropped, and so he made a bunch of moves to recoup his losses. He replaced some skilled craftsmen with machinery. He cut wages in order to save on labor costs, and he busted McLuckie's union because, well, unions make prices go up. So if he busted the union, then he could, well, put that. Unions make costs go up as opposed to prices. So if he busted the union, then he could drive wages down even more. Now, he knew this would cause a lot of problems, so Carnegie, not wanting to be there when the problems happened, he went off to Scotland. Carnegie is Scottish, so he decided he was going to go home and have a little vacation. And he left Henry Clay Frick in charge. We briefly mentioned Henry Clay Frick last chapter. Mr. Frick was strongly anti-union, and he handled it, well, we'll get there. So Frick built a 3-mile, 15-foot-high fence capped with barbed wire around 3 sides of the factory. The 4th side of the factory was bordered by the river, and then he ordered a lockout on July 1st. So he wouldn't even let the workers in. So he sort of like preempted the strike. But this isn't where it ends. So I've just got an image of Homestead, at least one of the buildings there. Okay, let's get into the action. So Frick, well, first let me describe how a strike would go. It's kind of like a My brain fog is really not behaving today. It's like a siege. So think like medieval era where you come in and surround a city, and so you're trying to starve out the city. Well, it's sort of like that, and the goal is to make the company lose money faster than the workers are losing money, because the workers aren't working, obviously, but the factory isn't producing. So the factory is losing a ton of money, but the workers are also not making any money, so they don't have any food. However, what often happens is, like in this case, the town rallied around the workers, supported them, kept them fed, and gave them an early victory. So our boy Frick decided to bring in mercenaries, quite literally. July 6th, barge loads of Pinkerton detectives hired by Frick sailed along the river to make it to the plant. McLucky called these men a band of cutthroats, thieves, and murderers in the employ of unscrupulous capital for the oppression of honest labor. Yeah, Pinkertons were just mercenaries. If you need something done, you pay Pinkertons to come in and shoot somebody. The Union men, though, did shoot back. One of the barges were set on fire, and the Pinkertons were forced to retreat. And while 3 Pinkertons were killed, 9 strikers were also killed in the process. And Frick decided, well, the mercenaries didn't work out. Let's just call in the damn army. So he did. Before the army got there, while everybody was waiting to see what happened next, because, of course, the whole United States, but the whole world heard about Frick calling in mercenaries to shoot at workers. Alexander Berkman, anarchist who wasn't even part of the Union, strolled into Frick's office and shot him in the neck. Frick survived, and we're going to see in the video, he was not happy about getting shot in the neck. But him being assaulted by an anarchist who, once again, they just assumed was part of the Union, and then the state prosecuted the Union, broke the state strike entirely. And then the aftermath, McLucky and how many other? I just said other Union officials blacklisted. He fled to Arizona. Carnegie heard about McLucky's fate. He tried to send an anonymous donation to him, but he refused it because, it's obvious, like, oh, there's this massive anonymous donation. It's like, yeah, that's from Carnegie. Screw him. Eventually, though, a friend of Carnegie's had an Arizona railroad give McLucky a job as a machinery repair superintendent. So McLucky didn't just die penniless in Arizona. So that's nice, at least. We'll see the fates of some other Union leaders here in just a minute. So here's Homestead. You got technically it's 3 sides, 1, 2, and then that's like the 3rd side, and then the river there on the other end. And I just looked up Pinkerton detective. I was like, oh yeah, I was just gonna put that. I made this a long time ago. There's old Frick hanging out on top of the Homestead factory and keeping everybody out. I think this is actually a photograph of the barge burning. That's why it's got like 2 pixels in it. There's an etching of the barge burning, so it's slightly better. And here you got the army coming in to quell the strikers, which by then they didn't really have any fight left in them. I don't think there was any violence between the army and the strikers. I think once the army rolled in, the strikers just kind of gave up. And I've got this image, it's the like an anarchist concert, anarchist orchestra. The joke being that anarchists don't really have a leader or a plan, which isn't entirely true. They just don't like the idea of a government. Okay. Normally I would show the video here, but again, if I show it online, they will shut down my video, so we'll do it at the end. Let's at least do the Pullman strike. Yeah. So, George Pullman. He believed he was a friend of the workers, but also, when it came to the economy, he was a realist. When things got bad, he had to shift things around to, make himself money still. 1893, as I've alluded to, there was an economic downturn, a depression. So he had to cut wages for his workers, but also, as I mentioned in the last chapter, he also basically had most of his workers living there at the factory, so they also paid him rent. So he cut wages without lowering the rent. So they now had less money, but were still paying him the same amount of money. Yeah, they were pissed off, and they had a strike the next year. So they belonged to the American Railway Union, which was headed by Eugene V. Debs. We will talk about Debs multiple times between now and like 1900, maybe after 1900. We're going to talk about Debs a bit, so keep him in mind. He believed that organizing labor was a major part of workers' rights. Pullman, though, didn't bother with calling in mercenaries. He was wily. He appealed to the President Grover Cleveland's Attorney General Richard Olney, said that strikers are interfering with the delivery of mail by train, and that's considered a federal problem. So Debs and the other union officials got an injunction from federal government, ordered to stand down because of the Sherman Antitrust Act's law against those who conspired to restrain trade. The Antitrust Act that was supposed to keep companies from getting too big was being used against the unions. Needless to say, Debs refused and was arrested and sent to jail. However, we're going to see more of Debs. He later formed the Socialist Party of America. This advocated for a peaceful, democratic rise to power, as opposed to the violent overthrow of the government, which is what we saw from Karl Marx. Yeah, Debs is going to be around for a while. This is the image I showed you guys before, with Pullman lowering the wages while keeping the rent where it was, and the employee being caught in the middle. Then we have the beginning of the Pullman strike, but it got aggressive real fast. They started burning these rail cars real quick. And as we saw from looking at the rail cars, they probably burned real good. All that like silk and stuff. There's the government boys coming in ready to stomp on some civil liberties. And there they are stomping on civil liberties. Oh, one more. Industrial workers of the world. Thought we were at the end. I was like, man, we're getting done early, but there's one more here for unions. So there was a major mining strike in Idaho, which formed the Western Federation of Miners. This formed the IWW, also known as the Wobblies, which is a terrible name. They were interested in raising wages, improving working conditions, gaining union recognition. They were real broad, and as we're going to see going forward, the government hated them. They were terrified of the IWW. Anytime you see, like, enemies of America, you have, like, terrorists and socialists and anarchists, and then you have, like, IWW off to the side. Like, they're a labor union, guys. They try to unite skilled and unskilled workers to try to overthrow capitalism. They like using strikes and other direct action organization. Rallies tended to meet with government force or corporation-inspired mob violence because, as we've seen, the corporations like using violence as much as anybody else, be it mercenaries or just some weird simps on the internet. It's like, oh yeah, this rich guy totally gets me, even though he's clearly not human. But they had a really broad appeal. They appealed to lumberjacks in the northwest, dock workers in the ports, miners in the west, farmers in the Great Plains, textile workers in the northeast. Carried out about 150 strikes, and several were actually successful. We'll talk about other types of strikes a little bit later on. But yeah, this is their logo. They're a pretty successful bunch, the IWW. And if you can tell from their name, Industrial Workers of the World, they were well beyond the United States. So here we have IWW, industrial unionism there over the creepy octopus of capitalism. And down here below you have something written in, this is Italian. You can tell it's at least Latin from the way it's written. And the caption at the bottom of that, Il Proletario, an Italian language IWW newspaper, borrowed graphics from the Solidary and Industrial Pioneer. The editor would usually add a caption in Italian. The above caption reads, "Workers, give me more strength in my arm," which is a common idea of, like, the more people in the union, the more strength in the arm, to fight back against capitalism. So here's some IWW strikes. And the terrifying Wobblies there, being surrounded by bayonets. Another one here. Guarding approach to mills in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Okay. So I'm going to end the stream because they don't need I don't need to get copyright struck. And then I will grab the video that I actually found before class started. So yeah, for you guys, I will post the link in an email, I guess.